I'm going to try to squeeze a huge universe into a ball, as T.S. Eliot says in the famous poem, Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, and roll it towards you. So it won't be a comprehensive story, but I hope that at the end of the talk, you will have an appreciation of two things. One is the fact that Gujaratis do care for literature, and we do have a very strong literary tradition encompassing a wide range of writing. And the other is that while Gujarati is a language of Gujarat state, it is spoken elsewhere. I'm going to speak to about some writers who have written in Gujarati from other parts of the world. And most notably, I'm going to emphasize the role of the city I was born in, Bombay, now Mumbai, and why it has played a pivotal role, not only in terms of writers and patronage, which is, of course, important because Bombay is where the money is, but more important that is the fact that modernity, as we understand it, and I'll speak about that a little bit, can be ascribed to the shaping of the young Gujarati mind of students who had come from Gujarat to study in Bombay, particularly at one college, Elphinstone College. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well. But without further ado, I think I'll go on for about 30 to 40 minutes from now, and then we'll have questions. And we have if it's not a hard stop, I can stay a little longer. I leave that to the organizers on that. Now, not that every Gujarati is a Hindu, but many Gujaratis, regardless of their faith, do celebrate the Diwali. And in the days leading up to Diwali, there is a day called Chopada Pujan, which basically means worshipping books. And those of you who know Gujarati families know that the books that they worship tend to be of a red cover, and they tend to be books of accounts. And they are not books of textbooks or literary works and so on. And that has perpetuated this idea that we care about numbers and not words. Numbers are clear, words are amorphous. Numbers give clarity and certainty. Words have ideas which can be interpreted in different ways. And Gujaratis are practical and pragmatic, and therefore they like the certainty of numbers. And Gujaratis are very good at business. And I should add that I'm going to focus on Gujaratis a lot here, because I am one. I went to a Gujarati medium school, and I've just written this 700-page book called Gujaratis, the Portrait of a Community. So I'm going to refer to some of the things I've written in the book. And therefore, the focus is on Gujarati. Of course, if we focus on Bombay and Mumbai, there is Konkani, Marathi, Urdu, English, Punjabi, Bengali, all sorts of literature. But that's not the topic of our conversation today. So I want to deal with this, that yes, we do worship books which have numbers. We do think those are very important because they give the resources to pursue the kind of hobbies we want to. If you go to Gujarati home, it will be full of books. Now, the books that you will find there would be different. They will not necessarily be contemporary Gujarati fiction. You will find books on self-help, how to lose weight, how to make money on the stock market, how to start a business. These are the kind of books you might find. You might also find picture books. You might also find books on cooking. You might also find books on art. And that too, it would be Bandhani and Patola and all that kind of Gujarati art. You will find books on how to get rich quickly. And you will find a lot of biographies of business people, both Indian and non-Indian. So Steve Jobs might be there, Elon Musk might be there, and Dhirubhai Ambani, books on him will be there in that kind of a setting. And biographies will be there. And translations, a lot of translations, but not only of Tagore and Sharat Chandra, but also of Rajdeep Sardesai's book on politics, or Hindol Sengupta's book on history. These are the kind of things you might find there. Religion plays a very important role. You will find magazines on our desks, and you will find contemporary issues referred to in a magazine called Chitralekha, which has just celebrated a major anniversary. It has been going on for years. You will probably find Chitralekha there. You might find magazines like Janakalyan and Akhandanand, which also deal with religious and spiritual matters and matter a lot to a lot of people who read. And therefore, you might think that Gujarati angle and outlook and awareness and appreciation of literature is primarily about some sort of self-improvement, improvement of one's economic conditions, improvement of the taste of foods you eat, and improvement of your own lifestyle and how to get better with your life. But that's not all, and that's what I want to talk about. And the earliest chronicles, if you were to look at them, like with almost every other literature in the world, and there's this wonderful book by Salman Rushdie called Languages of Truth, of his third collection of his essays, which begins with the importance and power of stories. That yes, of course, all living things are equal, but what distinguishes us from others is the fact that we tell stories and we are able to encompass and we are able to imagine it. I'm not saying the animals cannot, but we haven't fathomed or understood that language. So let's leave that aside too. But oral culture becomes very important in that. And that oral culture typically comes from the troubadours. the singers and itinerant travelers who tell stories about different places, different times, different contexts through songs, through hymns, and so on. And you have bhats, as they were called, or charans, and they're melodious music, the way they sing and tell stories of the Saurashtra Rajwadas or princely states, and how they were fighting each other or fighting the invading army that came from elsewhere. You have stories like that. There was an English administrator called Alexander Kinloch Forbes, and those of you who are in Mumbai will know that there is a very nice institution called Farbas Sabha, because we Gujaratis mangle every pronunciation. We call snacks snakes, and we call ball and bat bull and bait. So I mean, we call Forbes Farbas, and therefore the Sabha is called Farbas Sabha. It used to be near Congress House, near Nana Chowk, between Nana Chowk and Opera House. It's now moved to a much bigger and better better environment in Juhu Vilepala, which is, I suppose, the hub of Gujarati theatre was there, because Paresh Rawal, Swarup Sampat, Mahendra Joshi all used to be at that NM college, and Chandrakant Shah and so on and so forth. So all of that was happening there. So Farbas Sabha is somewhere near there. And of course, then there is the other Gujarati enclave in Bombay, which I've just learned on my recent trip. It's called Makabo, which is Malad, Kandivali, and Borivali, like as if you're talking about tri-state area. And that's another Gujarati stronghold. And in all these places, you will find very thriving Gujarati culture. Now, Forbes was extremely interested. He died very young. He died in his 40s, but he was extremely interested in Gujarati culture. And he was befriended. He became a very good friend of a poet called Dalpat Ram. And the two of them worked together to create a book called Rasmala. Now, that is in 4 parts. It's a masterpiece of an encyclopedic account of the stories of that time. And to an extent, if he had not compiled those stories, a lot of us would not have got it documented. And you could argue, and this can be a debatable point, that the greatest set of historical novels that came out in the last century were Kanhaiyalal Munshi's Patan trilogy. Patani Prabhuta, Gujarat no Raj, and Nath and Raja Dhiraj. And he was able to document a lot of this basically by looking at stories that were being talked about and sung by poets and so on. So I think that's worth looking at. Munshi, of course, has an extremely important impact on Gujarati mind through the concept of Asmita. But if I start speaking about that, we'll be talking about only that for the next 40 minutes. So I won't do that. If there is a burning question, I can go back to it. But otherwise, let's pause it and remember that the word Asmita, which means identity, self-awareness, and not pride and not arrogance, comes from Munshi's novels at that time. And another good chronicler of that time was Behramji Malbari, who wrote a book in English, Gujarat and Gujaratis. And it's a very funny account. He's, of course, Parsi, as his name suggests. And in my expansive definition, Parsis are Gujaratis, because Gujarati is a language and not a religion. It's something we need to bear in mind. And therefore, Parsis do speak Gujarati and do write in Gujarati. Many of you probably know that the state anthem, the song that is usually sung all the time and talked about, is this poem called Jhan Jhan Vase Ek Gujarati, Tyan Sada Kal Gujarat. Wherever there is a Gujarat, it is Gujarat forever. And the poet was Ardeshar Khabardar, who was Parsi. So there you go. We got our song from him. And there has been a lot of humor in that time too. There was a very famous poet who used to write these little couplets, and his name was Akshay Kumar, but he called himself Akho. And the late Giv Patel, who died a couple of years ago, translated a lot of his poems. And it was very funny, and the way he approached and challenged blind faith and all that. And one of his famous ones was, Ek Murach ne evi tev, patthar etla puje dev, katha suni suni futya kan toy na avyu brahmagnan, which roughly means that there was a fool who had a habit to worship every stone that he saw. And he heard and heard and heard all these kathas, but still he never attained wisdom, which is the ritualistic aspect of religion, which is kind of similar to those of you who know Marathi literature, that poems that came in by Arun Kolatkar, Jejuri, where he also distinguishes between real faith and blind faith. So that's something worth keeping in mind. So that's roughly where we are talking about, is about where we were at that stage and at that time. And from that, I want to move to the first major yug or age of Gujarati literature. And this is where it was called Pandit Yug. And the Pandit Yug, because it was become more and more Sanskritized, the language at that time. And the person responsible for it was also the person who raised funding for Forbes to create the Gujarat Vernacular Society, which later becomes the Farbas Sabha. And that was my great-great-grandfather, Mansukh Ram Tripathi. And his first cousin was a man called Govardhan Ram Tripathi. And those of you who are familiar with Hindi cinema and so on would remember in 1968 there was a beautiful film called Saraswati Chandra, which is more known for its music and Nutan's brilliant acting. But in that film was based on the 4-part novel, which is almost 1,800 pages. It's a sprawling saga of a modern young man who's well educated and is trying to find a meaning in life to be more useful. He's from an elite family, living in a posh part of Bombay, and then and his discovery of himself. And I'll come to Saraswati Chandra a little bit later because it has a very important role in shaping of the Gujarati mind. Now, Govardhan Ram Tripathi was from Nadiad, so was Mansukh Ram, and so were many others, Manilal Dwivedi and Balashankar Kantharia, and there are many writers of that period. And in fact, there is a scholar in Nadiad called Hasit Mehta, who has done a wonderful job of creating a 1 square mile area by putting these little blue plaques, as you see in London and New York, where famous writers have been born or lived or grew up or spent some time. And you find Indulal Yagnik's home there, my uncle Kulin Chandra Yagnik's home there. All those things you will find who are all scholars and writers and who had enriched the Gujarati mind. Now, this brings me to the slightly controversial point I'm going to make, which is that while Nadiad was a birthplace of many of these people, it is hard to make the case that Nadiad shaped their minds, because we don't know, or at least I don't know the record of these writers periodically meeting. Now, we know, if you look at Paris of the 1920s, we know that Hemingway, Fitzgerald, and Picasso and Joyce used to meet at Gertrude Stein's home or in the cafes in Paris. And there used to be an exchange of ideas between them. Same thing happened in New York in the 60s. And same thing happened in Baroda in the 60s and 50s, which I will come to in a while when we speak more about the Gujarati. But we don't know if the scholars in Nadiad met. However, their minds were shaped because many of them came to Bombay to study, including Narmad from Surat, and they all went to Elphinstone College. So the modernity, the rebelliousness, the need to reform and change the society, the need to move on from the conservatism and paternalistic obscurantism that you see from the Rajwadas, the princely states. A lot of people wanted to embrace the modernity that the British rule provided, rule of law. You could do commerce without any interference. There was transparency, and general. And a lot of them ended up becoming lawyers. Govardhan Ram Tripathi was a very well-known lawyer. It was only in the late 1880s, that he decided to leave Bombay, comes to Nadiad, and starts writing Saraswati Chandra. So yes, he wrote from his house in Nadiad, but the mind that was shaped this city, Mumbai, had a lot of role in that. And I think we need to keep in mind, Trilip Suruda, also a very well-known scholar, has written about it extensively. And so has Amrut Gangar. I don't know if he's listening in today, but Amrut Gangar is a great historian. And I'm sure he has either given a Khaki talk, and if he has not given a Khaki talk, he should give a Khaki talk on cinema, because he's a great historian. And he is in Mumbai. And then there was Manilal Dwivedi, who was a very controversial guy. I mean, he knew Vivekanand. He could have gone to the Chicago World Conference in 1893. He's written on Hinduism. So as a scholar of religion, he was very good, but he had a very strange personal life. He was licentious. He had many relationships, and he was therefore looked down upon by some people. And again, I don't know if Manoj Shah, the director, is in the audience today, but he did a very good play about him called Jal Jal Mere Patang, whose sets were designed by the great painter Atul Dodia. So again, this linking, and again, these ideas and this theater, the play, the idea came from Mumbai and not necessarily from Gujarat. It's something worth bearing in mind. Now, after this phase of Nadiad and its importance, I should also mention Balashankar Kantharia, who wrote ghazals, and he had this magazine called Buddhi Prakash, which was sort of like, trying to expand the thinking and take us further on. But then another famous Gujarati comes into the being. He was inspired, among other things, by Saraswati Chandra. He left India. He was one of the earliest NRIs, if one were to say that, and went to Africa and to settle a dispute between two communities. But he had an experience where he was tossed out of a train in Pietermaritzburg, and then he realized the importance of self-right, self-worth, and fighting for your rights. And he started organizing people. He started transforming the place. And as every South African has told me, Salil, you gave us Mr. Gandhi, a barrister. We gave you the Mahatma. And that's exactly what happened. that he came to South Africa and he started to expand. He created a Tolstoy ashram, Phoenix ashram. And if you look at it, of course, there are many inspirations for Tolstoy and Phoenix ashram. I don't want to over-egg the pudding here, but Kalyan Gram, which was the welfare village that Govardhan Ram Tripathi creates in the last part of Saraswati Chandra, had an impact. In fact, there's a very famous quote where Gandhi has praised Saraswati Chandra for having inspired him hugely. So it's something worth keeping in mind, the interaction between writing, and because the Saraswati Chandra was finished, Govardhan Ram Tripathi died in 1907. I think the fourth volume was completed in 1902. So we are talking about a time when, and Gandhi was in South Africa from 1893. So he was reading it as it was being written. And therefore the view is very, very fresh. Now, Gandhi later comes to India. And when he comes to India, he does stand for elections to be the president of the Gujarati Sahitya Parishad, and he loses. It's the only time I think he has ever, it was his first election he stood for, and he lost. And the people who were opposing him said that Ato Baharna Manas che. He's from outside. What does he know of Gujaratis? And that's what had happened to him. But later in I think in 1929 or 30, he stands again and wins, or it's 36. I'm not entirely, I mean, it's in my book, but I don't remember the year exactly off the top of my head. But if you look at, he gave an address there, and that transformed the thinking of Gujarati writers. What he said essentially was that તમે આ બધું લખો છો એ ઘણું સારું, પણ આમાં કોશિયાને શું ફરક પડે? You're saying all these things, which is wonderful, but what difference does it make to Koshia? Koshia being a farmer who's tilling the land. Are you going to make any difference to the lives of the poorest and the weakest? You know, the last talisman that Gandhi wrote was also that, you know, whenever you're thinking of any action, think of its impact on the weakest and the poorest. And once you do that, all your doubts will melt away. And I think he gave that challenge to Gujarati writers who are otherwise ensconced in this Pandit type literature. In fact, Ramanbhai Nilkant, another very well-known writer, ridiculed this emphasis on Sanskrit, one from the point of view of humor through a character called Bhadram Bhadra, who goes to a railway station, but he doesn't go to a railway station. He goes to Agniratha Viramasthana, and he buys a Mulya Patrika and not a ticket. I mean, this is the way he Sanskritizes and makes the language difficult, which is funny at one level if you know the language, but its impact is to drive out the influence of Arabic, Persian, Parsi, Muslim, Dalit, all the other vocabularies that have enriched Gujarati language. They were getting eliminated out of it. And Gandhi wanted to challenge that. He wanted Saral Gujarati, Siddhi Gujarati. And he, one of the persons who actually took, and Bidu Jhadapyu, we call it in Gujarati, that he took the challenge up was Kaka Sahib Kalelkar, a Marathi man, Dattatreya Kalelkar. And he wrote the first ever Jodhni Kosh, the dictionary. And then he also wrote beautiful memoir like Smaran Yatra and Rakhadvano Anand, which basically encompasses, and he was one of the great scholars of Gujarati, although born in a Marathi family. So, I mean, for me, he's a Gujarati, just as for me, again, Jasprit Bumrah is a Gujarati because he speaks it fluently, grew up in Ahmedabad. So there you go. So that's one thing to keep in mind, but this influenced several important writers. One was Pannalal Patel, Malela Jeev and Manvini Bhavai, two great novels he wrote about the quote unquote lower caste communities, which I would always call oppressed or depressed communities rather than using that pejorative value-laden term, lower and upper caste. I prefer to call dominant castes and repressed classes, but that's just my personal view. But Pannalal Patel wrote those two novels. Then you had Darshak, Manubhai Pancholi, who was also inspired by Gandhi, gave his life in a village, he devoted his life to a village called Sanosra later. He was an education minister for a while, and he wrote one of the most important novels of that time in the 1930s and in the 40s actually, and 40s and 50s, which was called Jherto Pida Jani Jani, which means we are drinking the poison knowingly. And it's important because its pivotal character is Satyakam, who is actually, and his love interest, Rohini, and they are in a village and they're in a farm. And while they are in the farm, while he's confined to a small place, his mind is very open. And he actually has debates about whether Gandhi should write to Hitler to stop fighting the Second World War. Now, I mean, this shows the breadth of the man's imagination and so on. And he even has long discourses about the Spanish Civil War. So obviously, he's an extremely well-informed person, happens to be in rural Gujarat, Satyakam. And so it's something worth bearing in mind. Ramanlal Desai wrote a very good novel about 1857 called Bharelo Agni, which means the cinders which might spark into a fire. I also want to note Sundaram here, Tribhuvan Das Luhar, who later got inspired by Aurobindo, Auroville Ashram and the mother, Pondicherry but he was a philosophical poet, and he also challenged the way upper caste Gujaratis saw, or the dominant caste Gujaratis saw the repressed classes. And there were some very good poems that he wrote. Two other poets I want to mention and note from that time. One was a prince called Sursinji Gohil, who wrote under the name Kalapi, and he wrote in Chand, the meter, and he could sing beautifully. And he has written some very, very lovely poems about his region. Lathi was the place where he was the ruler of. And the other great writer from that was, just as Gandhi called, just as Tagore called Gandhi Mahatma, and Gandhi called Tagore the national poet, Rashtriya Kavi, he had a Rashtriya Shayar, the national balladeer, and that was Jhaverchand Meghani. Jhaverchand Meghani has also written beautifully about the rural Gujarat and Saurashtra, Saurashtra Nirasdar, and books like that, and some extremely hummable songs. And I don't know if it's the play is still running, but for some years ago, Utkarsh Majumdar used to run this play on called, I think it was called Kasumbino Rang or Koino Ladokwayo. One of the two poems of Meghani was what he had used as his title at Prithvi Theatre. It was a musical, and it was just very moving because I'd gone to see it, and I remember every time he started singing, the whole audience started singing with him, because we know these songs by heart. And one of the poems that he wrote, and the editor of a newspaper called Full Chab showed it to Madhav Bhai Desai, Gandhiji's secretary, before Gandhi went for the second roundtable conference. And it was basically to warn Gandhi that, you are hoping to do something important, but it may not be successful. And the poem went like this: Chello katoro jherno api jajo bapu, sagar vina nav anjali dhol jo bapu. You are going to the roundtable conference, and please drink the last poison chalice, because this is what you have to do as a form of duty for the country. And so he did that, and that's something worth bearing in mind. Now I notice we are by the clock, I have only 6 minutes, and I barely reached halfway point. So I'm going to run through a little bit what I talk about, the part that is most interesting for me, which is the whole idea of modernity in Gujarati literature. I said Mumbai had a very important role in the 19th and early 20th century, but later in the 20th century, the credit rightly goes to Vadodara or Baroda. And if you, when you read one of Salman Rushdie's essays about his time in India soon after Midnight's Children, so this was probably in his first collection of non-fiction, Imaginary Homelands, he writes about meeting Suresh Joshi, the Baroda poet and scholar and essayist and novelist and critic and many other things. And sort of, it's a crude compare, but he was sort of like Gertrude Stein, except that he was himself incredibly creative and not just a connoisseur. And under him and around him, an entire movement of literature emerged. So Suresh Joshi had something very interesting to tell Rushdie, because Rushdie said that, are you worried about the impact of English literature on Gujarati? He said, no, I'm more worried about Hindi, because it's like Russian and Czech language, because he was referring to Kundera. And Kundera had said that, Czech is threatened not by English, but by Russian, because Russia is an near power which can overpower it. And I think that's the thing he was driving at, that Gujarati is not under threat from English, but from Hindi and other dominant languages in the region. It again, thought worth keeping in mind. But at that time, some other very, very good poets came into picture. One was Sitanshu Yashaschandra. Incredibly, he's a Renaissance man. He writes about Ho Chi Minh, he writes about Odyssey and Iliad, he writes about Sanskrit literature, he worships and adores Narsi Mehta. We haven't even spoken about Narsi Mehta, but the whole idea and notion of an equal, non-discriminatory Gujarat comes from Narsi Mehta, who goes to Dalit areas and sings bhajans there. And he actually talks about the unity of a God in his poem, Ek Akhil Brahman Mein Ekaj Tu Shri Hari. Jagine jo to jag dise nahi. He wakes up and he can't see the world around him, the situation around. So it truly, and of course the bhajan he wrote, which is probably the world's most well-known bhajan, Vaishnav Janto Tenere Kaiye, which has been sung in almost every country in the world, not just by Indian students. At the time of Gandhi's 150th, there was a beautiful video of children from around the world, different races, different nationalities, singing that song. So
Salil, you don't need to be rushed. It's okay. Take your time. If you need another 15, 20 minutes, take the time you need. I think
so
there's
long
enough
as
people that
I'm
are
not taking other people's
loving what
time
you're
to
doing.
get dinner and all that. Yeah.
Not at all.
Yeah. No, anyway. So yeah, so I was talking about Suresh Joshi and what he did. And there you saw a confluence of art and literature. There was Jyoti Bhatt, there was Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh, again, a brilliant poet and writer, Bhupen Khakkar, not just a chartered accountant, not just an amazing painter, but also more than that, an incredibly good writer as well, playwright, in fact, and great sense of humor. I mean, in Bhupen's painting. He was in Baroda at that time. K.G. Subramaniam was there. Ratan Parimu was there. I mean, it's just, yeah, and Nilima Sheikh, of course. When you talk about Ghulam, you can't not mention Nilima as well. They were all there, and they really made it a thriving intellectual hub. They had they had publications like Kshitij and Uhapo, and then a journal called Etad that came out. In Ahmedabad also there was a movement. There was Kavilok, which was more popular, but then there was a movement called Ray Mutt, which was challenging the Gujarati literary establishment in an extremely good manner. Now, all this while Bombay also had produced poetry, and one of the great Bombay poets to play a very important role as an impresario and popularizing poetry and making it part of everyday life was Suresh Dalal. And Suresh Dalal wrote beautiful, beautiful poems of his own. He, Harinder Dave, Jagdish Joshi, and Vipin Parikh were the four who, and Jaya Mehta. These were the poets who wrote poems, and they appeared in a bi-monthly magazine called Kavita, which I believe is still going on. And I urge people of Janmabhoomi to put its archives online for free, because I mean, it is a repository of great poetry, and Kavilok also should do the same. And I know there is there's some good work being done, I think, by Pankti on collecting the little magazines of Gujarat, which are relatively less known. And I think all these things, now that the internet allows us to put these things in the public domain, should come in the public domain. I think that's very critical. But around Suresh Joshi, there was this nucleus that emerged. Nitin Mehta was, and then it had an echo in Bombay. So in Bombay, there was this, at Farbas Sabha, Jayant Parekh and Rasik Shah used to meet regularly. And I was a 14-year-old school kid at that time, and with my friend Karthik Bhagat, who's a gynecologist and an aesthete and a scholar, we used to go there as school kids, and we were taken quite seriously. We would write a poem and they would critique it well, tell us what's wrong with it, and so on. And that's where I got to meet people like Naushil Mehta, Nitin Mehta, Hemant Dhoda, Arun Adalja, and all these other people, and Sushila Jhaveri. Other writers used to, Mala Kapadia used to come there. And around the 50s, again, I'm going back and forth a little because I don't want to miss out talking about Niranjan Bhagat. Because Niranjan Bhagat and Chunilal Madia came to Bombay, and he joked to me. Niranjan Bhagat died in 2020 or 2021, but he told me that અમે મુંબઈ ગયા ને અમારા તોફાનથી ટાપુ હચમચી ગયો. We went there, and because of our mischief, the island got shook, trembled, is what he said. And he wrote beautiful poems about the city's aquarium, about double-decker buses. He was just amazed by what he saw. And he wrote some incredibly nice modern poems. Chalman Mumbai Nagri Joa Puch Vinani Magri. Let's go to Bombay, which is a crocodile without a tail. I mean, it's a very crude translation. Rita, I think either Rita Kothari or Suguna Ramanathan have translated it very well, and it's available, and you can look it up. But An Aquarium was another great poem that he had written. So all that writing was going on, and from rural voices, Manilal Desai came in, and Ravji Patel came, who tragically, both of them died early. Ravji Patel had TB, but his amazing song, Mari Aankhe Kankuna Suraj Atmiya, is something that has become a leitmotiv as a Marashu song. In my on my eyes, the sun sets like the kanku, the red dot. Yeah, I mean, is the way it goes. Yeah, and it's an absolutely beautiful song, and I would recommend that. Now, I've not spoken much about women writers, and not because they were not there, but I do want to give a special focus on them. There was Dhiruben Patel, whose wonderful screenplay became Ketan Mehta's fantastic film Bhavani Bhavai. I mean, she wrote that story. Another great writer was Kundanika Kapadia, who edited Navnit Samarpan, the magazine, and she wrote this amazing novel about early feminist Gujarati novel called Sat Pagla Akashma, 7 Steps into the Sky. There is right now Sharifa Vijliwala, who is in Surat, and she's been writing beautifully. I mean, she recently retired from Bir Narmad University, and it's really a marvelous account of. She has written a very moving essay about her life and about how Saurashtra had one kind of equationship between Muslims and Hindus, but when she came to Surat and tried to buy an apartment, how hard it was, and 60 odd people turned her down, saying, "Why don't you live in your area?" And that was a very new reckoning for her, that this is how Gujarat has changed. Among people who, other brilliant poets right now, there's Pratishtha Pandya. Her first collection was called Ura, 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 Ura. Ura is a sound which very few languages in India have. At least Hindi doesn't have it, but I do know that, at least as far as I know, but Marathi, Gujarati, and Tamil certainly have it. And it's called Ura, and it is brilliant use of mythology and its interpretation in terms of current reality. And it's politically charged poems. And I urge, she has a new collection coming out in a month or two, and I can't wait to read her poems. And two other poets that I want to talk about at some length, two novelists before that, are daughters of Gunwantrai Acharya, who wrote brilliant novels about oceans and cities. Daryalal was one of his novels. But his two daughters, Varsha Adalja and Ila Arab Mehta, they are just incredibly contemporary novels, feminist novels without being strident, but at the same time, and Varsha Adalja has actually written a very good and very expansive vision. One of Varsha Adalja's novels deals with Vietnam War and the impact of bombing on a village. So, I mean, they're not confined to the geography of Gujarat or Mumbai for that matter. But two other poets I want to talk about, who are poetesses of women poets I want to talk about. Neither of them lives in India. One is Panna Nayak, incredibly good poet in Philadelphia, Deshini and Videshini, and she's written short stories. She also writes in Hindi, and has translated her own works in English. So I definitely want to note Panna's amazing work. And the other person is Manisha Joshi, who lives in California. She also writes in Gujarati and Hindi, and erotically charged, using pickles and other things very well, and in a marvelous way. She brings the urban life of an emigrated person, like, the famous thing, ABCDEFG, American born, confused, lazy, emigrated from Gujarat. So yeah, so and it's captured very well in some of that. But even better, or even more interestingly, and in a more funny manner, was what was done by a poet who died tragically early, Chandrakant Shah, who died a couple of years ago, and he has written odes and hymns to the Blue Jeans. And he has an incredibly good long poem called Rear View Mirror, which is online. You can go and do Rear View Mirror, Chandrakant Shah, it'll come up. Just listen. It's a spellbinding performance from him. And I strongly urge you to look at that. Shobhit Desai's ghazals are important these days, as well as, the children's poems and other and funny poems from Udayan Thakkar are also what I would very warmly recommend. And the criticism, writing, art, and poetry of Prabodh Parikh are also names I definitely want to know. Now, we haven't spoken about Dalit writers yet, and it's not that I'm ignoring them, but Nirav Patel was important there because he originally he chose to write in English because he thought by keeping English away from the access for Dalits, in a sense, you were preventing them from advancing for better jobs. And therefore, he started initially in English, later he wrote in Gujarati. And he also tragically died a few years ago, but Nirav is someone I definitely want to strongly recommend. Jayesh Solanki, who also is no more with us, but he was part of the agitation in Una and challenging. And there is an anger in Nirav and Jayesh's poetry, which you don't find from earlier Dalit writers. And again, I urge you to look out for the work of Gopika Jadeja, who is a scholar who lived in Singapore. She now lives in Hyderabad, teaches there. And she had done she has been translating Gujarati Dalit poetry into English. And one of the things that comes through, and I've spoken to Martin Mekwan, the famous Dalit rights activist in Gujarat, and he says that, the burden of Gandhi has been too much. And just as Gujarati trade unions are not militant, Gujarati Dalit writing in the early days was not militant. So you won't get the anger of Namdev Dhasal in Marathi, for example, in a Dalit writer in Gujarat. But it's changing now. It's changing because after Una, where they said, that we will not clear the carcasses if you're going to come and hit us because we are removing the bodies of dead cows from the streets. And I think that anger is, and Jignesh Mevani, who doesn't write poetry, but is a scholar of poetry, and he is from the Dalit community, and he's an MLA now, I mean, he's someone who has been thinking a lot about land issues. So I've spoken about the role of this city, Mumbai. I keep saying this city, assuming we are all in Mumbai, and in a way, you can take Bombay out of a boy, but boy out of a Bombay, but never Bombay out of a boy. And that's my story. But if you look at that, Elphinstone College played an extremely important role. It's a bit sad that Gujarati medium schools are declining now in Mumbai. Gujarati theater is also on the back foot. Gujarati newspapers are not being read as much. And the second generation very often is not able to read the script. my brother Pranav, who's helping translate my book Gujarati into from English to Gujarati, he is very active in Gujarati theatre, and he would tell you that a lot of actors can't read the script, although they are Gujarati, because they've been to English medium schools, and the script they are given are in Roman script, and which has its own problems. For example, the word like Ora and Ana would appear as L or N, and it may not be pronounced right when it is being spoken actually. So there are issues like that that become important. But the modernity is still important, because if you look at the samajas, Satyashodak Samaj and the Buddhivardhak Samaj, a lot of these samajas took place in Bombay in the 19th century. The biggest libel trial, where someone who has been called a Martin Luther of India, Karsandas Mulji, when he took on the priest and exposed him, and there was a film about it, I believe, last year on Netflix or one of the OTT channels. But I mean, he's again someone who fought that case in Mumbai. Reforms have come from there, and while I mention fiction and poetry writers from women, two other women writers I definitely want to mention. One is Ela Bhatt, who we know more as the Magsaysay Award winner, but her book Anubandh is classic in terms of looking at how she worked with the rural communities. Mittal Patel is another reformer who has written a book called Sarnama Vagar Na Manas, People Without Addresses, which is worth reading as a work of nonfiction about the work she has done with the denotified tribes. And finally, of course, Sarup Dhruv, and she has written an amazing book which looks at what happened to the Gujarati psyche and mind after 2002. 2002 itself was a very significant part, because some Gujarati writers chose to ignore it. One poet actually said that this had to happen, and almost as if he was approving it. But there were poets who challenged. Ramesh Parekh challenged that, Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh challenged that, and other writers did speak out against it. And in fact, if I can, there's a long poem by Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh, but I don't have the whole poem with me, but I want to read out 3 lines from it, which I marked out somewhere. Just give me a moment. Yeah. Hatu to tevuj a badhu. Tola kem chodi gaya. All this as it was, because he comes back after the riots and comes to his house and he sees his manuscripts and sheets, which are probably of more value to him than the television or whatever he had in the house. Was not touched. So he said, all this as it was, why did the crowds let this remain? Was his question at that time. People were unwilling to sign petitions at the time, but there were some who were revolted, and those who did sign the petition at that time were usually from outside. It was Atul Dodia and Prabodh Parekh and Nandita Das, whose mother is Gujarati. So there you go. And she made the film Firak, the script was written by a Gujarati woman, Shuchi Kothari, who's a screenwriter in New Zealand. And then some Gujarati Muslim poets have now started writing in Urdu as a challenge. And some names that I have in the book are Zakaria Patel, Tanveer Ejaz, Iqbal Patel, Abbas Dana, Girgit Ahmedabadi, Agam Palanpuri, and many, many others. Ayesha Khan has written a very nice work that tattooed on my head is my religion, my faith, and that makes me the new pariah, is how it has been translated. I don't have the original with me, unfortunately, but that's where we are. So these small magazines have kept the language alive. Etad has now revived. Uhapo, Etad has been going on, but Uhapo is being revived in America by Babu Suthar, who was a former academic from University of Pennsylvania. And it keeps happening. Although if you were to go to a Gujarati literary event today, and Gujarati, the motivational speaker, who is often the compere, as we say it, the Sutradhar, often gets more emphasis, and I have in mind superb speakers, and they're incredible orators, whether it is Jai Vasavda or Kajal Oza Vaidya or Ankit Trivedi, Raish Manyar. But they will be themselves, except Kajal, who has written fiction, and so has Ankit written poetry. But that has become a persona. And so this whole idea of cult of celebrityhood has now entered Gujarati literature. And my hope is that people will rediscover what was happening at Farbas Sabha in the 80s and 90s, what was happening in Baroda in the 1950s and 60s. And there will be a revival, and we will have more Gujarati works of fiction which make us think again, look again, explore again, examine our lives again. And so that the books that we worship are not only red in cover, but yellow, blue, green, black, white, everything. Thank you. I'll stop there. I've really overrun my time.
Not at all, Salil. I think we're all, we could have let you go on another half an hour, we'd still be riveted. So thank you so much. It's really a pleasure listening to you. So, let me say, I mean, I'll take the first, I'll ask the first question as kind of my privilege here. So you brought up, right, this issue that successive generations have been kind of migrating, shifting to English, Hindi. What do you see as kind of the long-term sustainability of Gujarati as a literary language? Is a controversial question, is its decline underway, or are there new voices emerging?
No, there are new voices. It's just that we will not know the real quality for a while because audience tastes also change, right? I mean, not it applies to cinema and literature. I mean, I'm from a generation who like Kumar Shani, Satyajit Ray, and Mrinal Sen as filmmakers. And there will be people today who will find them very boring because the attention spans are much smaller. People find any video longer than 5 minutes on YouTube to be too long. And TLDR, too long, didn't read, is a common feature. So I think there'll be newer forms. I think you might see more audio books or what might be called podcast driven, or things on TikTok, things on Instagram type poetry. I mean, Rupi Kaur's success in English, I mean, her literary merit apart, is entirely because of internet as a phenomenon. And I think we will see more of that. Now, you do see a lot of stand-up comics in Gujarati and some of these rap artists in Gujarati. There's a song called Gotilo, 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 which is incredibly popular now. Coke Studio has played it and all that. And so you do get that sort of using and adopting earlier. I mean, there's another Sunny Jadhav is a well-known singer from Baroda, and he takes all the song, like the one on which I used to do Dandiya as Rangalo Jamyo Kalendarina Na Chogala Tara Ore Chabila Tara, but he increases the tempo by 1.5 because I think there's an impatience here. So the writer who's able to understand that and react to that and respond to that is likely to find audiences. Now, whether it will be aesthetically pleasing is to be decided later. I'm sure it will be because it's not as if I don't want to say that whatever's happening now is terrible. I mean, because I'm not read everything that's new. I mean, much of what I've spoken about is literature from at least 10 years ago. So I'll be the first to admit that there must be very exciting things happening of which I'm yet unaware, and I'd love to know more. But I don't think. But the language will survive till the people want to speak it, right? I mean, if the people themselves feel, if I mean, when I went to New Era school, the elite families in South Bombay felt it was a good school to send your children to. But even New Era school decided to switch from Gujarati to English. And then it fell by the wayside. And so I think if that's going to keep happening, then I think the language will be under some sort of a threat. But it will have to rely on patronage from the wealthy. And Gujaratis do have wealth. And historically, all these magazines and initiatives have survived because generous Gujaratis on Nepean Road and Walkeshwar and elsewhere, and Alkapur in Baroda and Shahibag in Ahmedabad have supported these initiatives.
Well, there's lots of comments coming in. Meher Malfatia says, fabulous talk. Thank you, Salil. And she's really endorsed your book. Everyone needs to read Salil's book on the Gujaratis. It's a treasure, bold, and so very insightful. Can you give us a quick couple of minutes on your book? How has the process been? The latest one that you've written, what is it about, and what can you tell us about
it? Took me, sure. I mean, I thought I'll write it in a year, and it took me 8 years. I was asked to write. I thought it's so simple because I am Gujarati, went to a Gujarati medium school, family connections with some interesting personalities of Gujarati history. So I thought it'll be very easy to do that. But once I started researching, I realized how little I knew and how much more I needed to know. So I kept traveling, and my work has taken me to many countries in the world. And over the years, I met Gujarati families in South Africa, in East Africa. I lived in Singapore for some years, so there, London again. I've not even talked about the diaspora here. But all of those things had kind of, played an influence. So I kept going back, and I'm a good note taker and diary keeper. So I kept going back to my original thoughts, and I don't throw these things away, which is where the mess behind me, as you can see. But therefore, I mean, I was able to, recreate a lot of that. And when there were things that were very distant past, I did go back to the people that, look, this is what you told me in 1998. It's been 27 years. Do you want to change anything? And sometimes they did. Sometimes they said, no, this is fine. I'm glad you still remember we spoke. Yeah, so it was a bit like that. And I decided to the typology was such that I wanted to look at traits. So, I mean, as soon as I tell you my section heads, you will know how it is divided. I won't have to tell you more. Who we are, the way we are, whence we came, where we live, which is the cities, beyond India, the way we earn, the way we politic, the way we create, the way we give, the way we pray, the way we eat, the way we play, and the way we kill. So yes, it's not just the good, not just the bad, but also the ugly. And yeah, I
Lovely.
mean, I wrote. I think after 6.5 years, I the pandemic helped. I mean, it forced me to stay at home and write and not do other things. And it was finished, I think, in late 23, and it took a year of editing and paring it down. My first draft was about 1,100 pages, and what you now have is 645 and
Wow.
100 pages of index. Yeah.
Did,
And
did you
the
find
brilliant
significant
editor, the
differences?
brilliant editor, David R. I would have to
Right.
struggle to tell you what has been cut out because it reads so smoothly thanks to him.
Did you find significant differences between Gujarati literature produced in India versus that created by the diaspora?
Yeah, so very few writers, and I don't want to make a broad generalization, but very few writers in the diaspora make the effort to write about where they are. I mean, there are some new changes. I mean, there's a young writer in Canada who's been writing stories about Gujaratis in Canada, and it's about mainly about Canada and not. But otherwise, what Chandrakant Shah said, Ghar Jurapo, nostalgia, So people would sit in Boston or Houston and write about a village in Saurashtra. Nothing wrong with it, but that's all there, or Dandiya Ras, or, pickles and Koel Awaz and stuff like that. So you felt a lot of yearning for what they'd left behind rather than celebrating where they are. And the beauty of Chandrakant Shah's writing was, I mean, writing is still with us. So writing is that he focused on contemporary. I really think his Rearview Mirror is an incredible poem capturing the angst and reality of the Gujarati life abroad.
Lovely. Anu
Yes,
says,
Sujata Bhatt is another very good poet in Germany who
okay.
has written. I mean, she knew Swami Anand very well, so she has written about that. And she has written a very nice poem about tongue, how the words and vocabulary to get out of it and so on. And that's also a poem which is being taught in British schools as part of the O levels and so on. So she's another very fine, but she writes in Gujarati, but she writes in English, but which does use a fair amount of Gujarati in it. And then there are people like Madhu Rai is another great writer. I haven't mentioned him yet, but he lives half the year or more than half a year in America. And those of you who saw Mr. Yogi, Ketan Mehta, was based on one of his Kimball Wood. I think that was the name. I forget the name of the novel. It was based on that. And his great play Apanu Evu was also his. So Kumarni Agashi, another great play he had written. So playwright and short story writer Madhu Rai is also someone. He was born in Calcutta and then was in America and spent time in Bombay too.
Um, Anu says, Salil, absolutely wonderful. Thank you. The names that you mentioned, Gujarati literature, taking me back to my childhood, meeting some of these people in person as friends or family, those days with Karthik Bhai.
Yes,
Uh,
of course.
so Ramakrishna asked this question, appears from your talk that Saurashtra had great patronage for Gujarati like Bombay. Why not other areas?
Well, Baroda did have it, right? I mean, the Amin family's role, in supporting art and literature was huge. I mean, Suresh Joshi's publications were basically supported by the Amin family initially, at least. So it's there. And in Ahmedabad also, a lot of the so-called Milna Sethia, as they are called, they did support it. I mean, it's probably not as visible, but I certainly wouldn't say that. So the wealthy in Gujarat did support literature, but they did it not as they saw it as an act of philanthropy. um, I I don't want to say that they didn't know what they were supporting. That would be a very wrong characterization. But not everyone who was donating was necessarily doing it to promote great literature. They were donating because they thought it was a good cause to support a writer. He wanted to bring out a pamphlet or a leaflet. Let's do that.
Yeah. So I have a question here from kind of personal experience, which is that when Gujarati, I mean, in any language, right? When it's translated, what gets lost? There's a lot that gets lost in the nuance, in the cultural depth, and though you gain something when you translate into what makes it universal. So I guess my question here is, I was wondering, and maybe rather hoping is a better word to use, whether Gujarati literature is kind of on the verge of a breakthrough where through translation it will finally reach and be celebrated by a much wider international audience, just as
I
other
hope
world
so.
literatures have been in the past.
No,
I
no,
mean,
it
has
started
Gujarati
actually.
literature missed its moment, or is the translation breakthrough still to come?
No, I think translation breakthrough has started, and some of the early translations are all very good novels that are being translated. Tridip Surud has done a monumental effort with not only Saraswati Chandra and Lilavati, the other book that Govardhan Ram Tripathi wrote, but he has also done the annotated version of Satyana Prayogo, Gandhi's autobiography, My Experiment with Truth. So you do have, Tridip has done incredible. He has also in the past translated something by Suresh Joshi, a novel called Janantike or Chinnapatra, one of the two. I've forgotten which one. If he's on the call, he may even correct me on this. Then Rita and Abhijit Kothari have done very good work. Rita has translated Ward by Ila Arab Mehta, Fence, and Angaliyat by Joseph McWan, and the Munshi trilogy with her husband, Abhijit. And Abhijit has just translated Mari Hakikat by Narmad, which is important. Then Nanshankar Mehta wrote one of the first novels in Gujarat, Karan Ghelo, has been translated by Tulsi Vatsal and Aban Mukherjee, which is again a very good translation. So I think you do get people going back to the classics and translating them and doing that. It's not at a, I mean, there's a lot of English to Gujarati translation, of course, and even Bengali to Gujarati. Sukanya Jhaveri had done incredible work in translating Tagore and Satyajit Ray. My exposure to Tagore and Satyajit Ray was through her translations and not so much. I can read Bengali. I chose to learn it later, but that came much, much later in my life. So yeah, I think
Well,
translation is the way forward. But some of the writers would be difficult to translate. I mean, I know that Jayant Parekh translated Ravji Patel and Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh for Adil Jasawala's great book, New Writing in India, which came out in 1977, the first modern anthology of Indian writing. And it had 3 or 4 Gujarati writers. I think it had Ravji, maybe Manilal Desai, and one or two more. Yeah. Anyway, and Ghulam Sheikh, and there was one more. I think there were 4 Gujarati writers in that anthology. And Jayant Parekh had worked with Adil Jasawala in translating those. So I think you do need more of that contemporary writing. But I've tried translating a poem by Ramesh Parekh. It's very hard to get the rhythm. It's very easy to get the words. But uh, when you're trying to translate someone as musical as Ramesh Parekh, unless you capture the music in his vocabulary, you're being an insufficient translator. But I've translated some of Niranjan Bhagat as well. And I translated those controversial poems of Parul Kakkar, which made the government very angry about, when she wrote about COVID and the dead bodies floating in the river. She had written that poem, which was translated in many languages and sung in Punjabi and so on. But I did translate that at that time. Yeah.
well, maybe this is a good use case for AI finally to build, to manage translation, but you'd lose nuance. I mean, that's a very
Not only
subtle
that,
part
I
of
think
it, right?
I mean AI has improved a lot, but 1 year ago I said AI is like a very precocious, self-assured 14-year-old teenager who has to give out the answer, even if he doesn't know the answer. And when you probe, he will say, it has been told, it has been found without giving you the citations. And that's the way I saw AI at that time. Of course, it's improved significantly. I see some very good um, accounts. In fact, there is a Babu Suthar, about whom I spoke earlier, has put a brilliant exchange with DeepSeek that he had yesterday or day before in English, and it's translated in Gujarati, about how DeepSeek translates Gujarati to or English to Gujarati or Gujarati to English. And it's fascinating. I've told him to make the English text more widely available because it deals with ethics and philosophy of translations very well. But that said, I think AI has a long way to go, and we have to be not cyborgs, but centaurs. I mean, we can't tell except what AI gives us. We ultimately have to use our brain, even if the grunt work is done by the body of the horse.
So Jyoti Kerkar says, a pleasure today listening to you, Salil. She has a question a bit more on Saraswati Chandra. Did the movie do justice to his life?
That's a very difficult question, isn't it? That if you're talking about Govind Saraya's movie, yes, I think it came close to the meaning. If you talk about the Sanjay Leela Bansali uh, curiosity, the less said, the better. It was terrible, absolutely. What it had nothing to do. It had just characters with the names from the novel, but it had nothing to do with the. I mean, Sanjay Leela Bansal is an incredibly successful. I mean, I wish he had just made the film without these names, then it would have been fine. But I mean, it takes so many liberties, setting the whole story in the UAE and showing bodybuilding each other and all that. I mean, I found it was very bizarre. But if you talk about the Govind Saraiya film, he has also made another film called Gunsundri no Ghar Sansar, which is the second, Saraswati is in 4 parts, Buddhidhan no Karobar, and it goes in 4. and Ratnanagari, and then the fourth one. But if you look at the second part is called Moon Sundari no Ghar Sansar. That was made into a film also by Govind Saraya, and that is, I haven't been able to find it. I saw it when it came out, but I'm sure it's at the Pune archives or somewhere, and I hope it is accessible. Yeah. And I think, Jyoti, you had a question about Bhavna Somaya translating female writer whose book was translated. I think you're talking about Kajal Oza Vaidya, but I'm not sure because I know that Kajal Oza Vaidya has written about Krishna and his relationship with women. Now, I don't know whether you're talking about the same book, but it could be that.
Yeah, and Sumanini says it seems that Kanhaiyalal Maniklal Munshi, another legendary scholar of Gujarati, is missing, and also Bharati Vidya Bhavan and his connection with Bombay and his contribution in constitution forming.
Yeah, so I'm not talking about law, and otherwise I would have to talk about Atul Setalwad and Ashok Desai and Justice Kanya and many others. I'm not talking about law and Gujarat. I'm not talking about the constitution here. And I did speak about Munshi at the beginning and his role in creating Asmita and Patani Prabhuta, Gujarat Nuna, Jai Somnath. I have my views on Munshi's writing. It creates a nostalgia and hearkening of a past, which is A, imagined, B, mythologized, and marginalizes Muslims and in fact sometimes otherizes them, which is profoundly problematic. But Bharati Vidya Bhavan is of course a great institution. I spoke about my book there, and I still remember small joke. I mean, I was with Prabodh Parikh at that event, and somebody, Prabodh very naughtily asked me that you've written this book, but you're not spoken to write this book, the two most important Gujaratis. And obviously he meant either Modi and Shah or Ambani and Adani. But I know how to duck bouncers, right? So I said, you know what? I did want to talk to them, but they're not with us anymore. Sadly, Gandhi and Munshi have died, is what I had said.
By this,
So yeah,
Jyotikeka says
Munshi is
yes,
very
Salil.
important. I
Yeah,
mean, but
yeah.
Munshi's political trajectory is interesting because on one hand, he has profound Hindu sympathies, but also at the same time, he writes a book called I Follow the Mahatma. He is part of the constitution, so the constitution that many people are today finding questions with. And a lot of people like it and praise Ambedkar, but the secular character, which people are challenging. Munshi was a drafter of that secular character. He moved from Congress to Swatantra because he thought Congress was too socialistic. And then he discovered his Hindu roots and does join Jansangh towards the end of his life. So it's a very interesting trajectory, and he deserves a separate talk. I believe a biography has been commissioned for him, which would be great to read. And one could also argue that looking at Gujarat today, not Gujaratis today, but Gujarat today, it's not Govardhan Ram's vision that is prevalent. It is not Gandhi's vision that's prevalent, but it is Munshi's vision that people relate to more. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is for Gujaratis to decide.
Well, there's lots of comments. Rupal Shah says, wow, thank you. Thank you, wonderful, says Karen. Vasuki had a question. Hi, Salil, great scholarship placing the Gujaratis in a wider Indian context. Would you say that the community has done a better or worse job in terms of preserving heritage?
Better or worse compared to who would be my question. Is it doing a good job? Let's put it that way. Now, one thing that I found sad, I mean, this time I went to the home of Meghani in Chotila. I went to Junagadh to see Narsi Mehta's Choro, as it is called. I saw Govardhan Ram's home, Smriti Mandir in Nadiad. And I've been, I mean, I have a bit of a thing about going to homes of writers and see how they lived. And some of those are in disrepair and some Muslim monuments. We are now going beyond the literature here. Sidi Sayyadni Jali is well looked after, and Sarkej, Naroza are looked after. But there are many other places which are in decrepitude. And one of the sad things is that, one of the important things in Gujarat is the step wells. The step wells all over, and many of them were built by queens. There's a very good book also about it by Purnima Mehta about step wells, which Urvashi Butalia published from Zuban, if I'm not mistaken, some years ago. But if you look at the step well, Muhammad Begdo was a very well-known medieval era, 15th, 16th century ruler of Gujarat. But of course, he was Muslim. And he built some of the step wells for basically Hindu, Muslim, anybody who wanted, the women who wanted to go down and collect water. And very sadly, some of the wells where his name was on the plaque, and miscreants, probably with right-wing Hindu sympathies, have erased those names now. And there have been articles about it. So there is not only a bit of monuments being in disrepair, and it's not unique to Muslim monuments. I'm sure there are lots of Hindu temples also in disrepair. And it's not just temples we have to worry about. We have to talk about historic places. So there is that problem on the heritage preservation, but also vandalism, which I mean that happens everywhere. People want to write their
Yeah.
names on Qutub Minar and all that, and also there's a kind of fake gentrification. I'm quite appalled by what's happening to Sabarmati Ashram. Let's leave it at that. I mean, to try to turn it into something like Disneyland as an amusement park on Gandhi does disservice to everybody, including to Gandhi. Yeah.
So
Yes.
just
Thank
closing
you,
comments, really?
Swarakshar.
Yeah.
Thank you from Swarakshar. Madura is a single Ravenswood. That was the name from which Mr.
Yes.
Yogi was made. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, look, Nilay says thank you, thanks a lot. And Jyoti says thank you for noticing my question answering. And she also says that yes, the stepwells are great in Gujarat. I have just one closing question for you. What is the future of Gujarati literature? Very broad, very open-ended question. Take it the way you want to.
Yeah, I think Gujaratis have imagination. I mean, one of the things I discovered while writing this book, and it was staring in my face, and I was stupid not to have noticed, is how good Gujaratis are at visual art. Manu Parekh, Ghulam Sheikh, Tayyab Mehta, Jahangir Sabawala, Giv Patel, Madhvi Parekh. I mean, I can keep naming artists after Haku Shah. I mean, I can keep naming artist after artist from Gujarat who have given incredible Jyoti Bhatt. I mean, let's keep, if I'm not named anyone, it's out of my poor memory. Let's leave it at that. But all I'm trying to get at is that you have that kind of expression which is incredibly good that you have, and I think it has been like that in literature too. Whether it's comparable to Marathi, Malayalam, Tamil, and Bengali, it depends on what you like from. I mean, in some ways they were pioneers. I mean, I always used to think Sharat Chandra's depiction of women was great and so on. But Sharat Chandra wrote his novels in 1910 and 20 and 1915. Govardhan Ram preceded him by a few years. At the same time, Govardhan Ram was conservative, and Sonal Shukla has a huge critique that Govardhan Ram did not let Kumud Sundari marry Saraswati Chandra because she was a widow. And he stopped there. And scholars on Govardhan Ram will tell you that because he did not want to describe a solution, he wanted people to come to their own conclusion. But if you read it today, you just feel, why can't they get married? She's now a widow, he's single, and they've met and they used to be engaged and they were in love. Why can't they marry? And very legitimate question for the 21st century perspective. But at that time, he decided to pause. But my point is that you have writers who have explored, challenged, question, and I think that will keep happening. But whether it will survive in the broader sense depends on the readers. And if the readers want to face questions that make them introspect, examine, and explore their current condition, that would be good. But if the readers want to get rich quick, lose weight, find out recipes, and find inspiring stories to follow, then these books will remain marginal. That's all I can say. Yeah.
Well, on that note, thank you so much, Salil, for spending your time talking to us about this really wonderful topic today. And thanks to all of you for having dialed in today and listening to this conversation. This talk will be uploaded onto our YouTube channel soon, so you can spread the word, get others to look in and listen to Salil as well. Thank you, and all of you have a great weekend, whatever's left of it. So cheers and see you again soon.
Yeah. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.